When you study what Iran actually asked for in 1951, control over its own natural resources, a fair share of its own oil revenue, sovereignty over its own territory, you find that these were not radical demands. They were the same demands that every Western democracy takes for granted as foundational rights of nationhood. Iran was punished for asking for what Britain and America already possessed as a matter of course. Before we go any further in this series, we need to tell a story that the previous episodes described from Washington and London. This episode tells it from Tehran. And when you hear it from Tehran, the last 70 years of the Middle East look completely different. Iran's democratic tradition is far older and deeper than Western discourse acknowledges. The constitutional revolution of 1906 established a parliamentary system, the Majlis, that predates the democratic institutions of most nations in the region. Iranian intellectuals, poets, philosophers, and political thinkers had been debating the nature of just governance for centuries before the West arrived with its oil companies. The Persian civilizational tradition, which produced some of the world's great literature, mathematics, and architecture, was not waiting for Western tutelage. It was a going concern, interrupted by outside interference, not a project in need of outside management. Mohammad Mosaddegh was not a revolutionary. He was a constitutionalist, a Swiss-educated lawyer and lifelong parliamentarian who had been fighting for Iranian sovereignty within the system for 30 years. His argument was simple and legally precise. The oil under Iranian soil belonged to Iran. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company had been extracting it for decades under concession terms that gave Iran a small fraction of the market value of its own resource. Mosaddegh proposed what any nation would consider elementary justice: nationalize the company, take control of the oil, and use the revenue for the Iranian people. Time magazine agreed with him enough to name him Person of the Year for 1951, calling him the most significant figure in the Middle East. Britain's response to the nationalization was not negotiation. It was economic warfare and then covert action. The Royal Navy blockaded Iranian ports. British technicians were withdrawn from the oil fields, sabotaging operations. The BBC, then as now a major source of Persian-language news, was used to spread disinformation in Iran, portraying Mosaddegh as a communist sympathizer and an unstable figure. When Mosaddegh appealed to the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, both upheld Iran's right to nationalize its own resources. The legal case was unambiguous. The British response was to ignore the legal verdict and pursue the covert one. In August 1953, the CIA and British intelligence ran Operation Ajax. The coup that removed Mosaddegh reversed the nationalization and restored the Shah. The CIA's own internal history of the operation, written in 1954 and declassified in 2013, describes it plainly. It was a success. It was American-instigated, and it set back the cause of Iranian democracy by an incalculable measure. What the history does not calculate, because it was written by the people who ordered the coup, is what was destroyed: a constitutional government, a democratic tradition, a chance for Iran to build a modern state on its own terms. The Iranians who lost those things know what they lost. They have not forgotten it in 70 years. The Shah that the CIA installed in 1953 was not the same Shah who fled in 1979. He was transformed by power and by the American support that made that power unaccountable. His white revolution, modernization by decree, without consent, disrupted Iranian society faster than it could absorb the changes. His SAVAK secret police, trained by the CIA and Israel's Mossad, became one of the most feared internal security apparatuses in the world. Amnesty International reported in 1976 that Iran had more political prisoners per capita than any country on earth. The Carter administration received these reports. It continued the arms sales. Iranian intellectuals, students, and activists of the 1960s and 1970s faced a stark choice: silence, exile, or SAVAK. Many of Iran's most brilliant minds left the country: doctors, engineers, writers, academics, who could not practice their professions under a regime that treated intellectual freedom as a security threat. Those who remained and organized did so at enormous personal risk. The poets and novelists who encoded political meaning in their work to evade censorship, the university students who distributed pamphlets at night, the clerics who used the mosque as the only institution the Shah could not fully control. These were not radicals. They were citizens of a country that had been denied the right to be a country on its own terms. The Iranian diaspora that left during the Shah's reign, and then again after the revolution, represents one of the most significant brain drains in modern history. Iranian-born scientists, physicians, engineers, and academics now contribute disproportionately to the intellectual and technological output of the United States, Canada, and Europe. The country that produced them, that educated them, that shaped their intellectual formation, received none of the return on that investment. American sanctions have kept it that way. The Iranians who built Silicon Valley companies, who won Nobel Prizes, who lead hospital departments and university physics faculties, they are Iranian civilization's output. Iran's isolation has been Western policy's input. What American policymakers consistently failed to understand about Iran was the depth and sophistication of its national pride. Iran is not a constructed colonial state. It is one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations, with over 2,500 years of recorded history, its own language, its own literary tradition, its own distinct identity. When Iranian nationalists said, "Iran for Iranians," when Mosaddegh said the oil belongs to Iran, they were not making an ideological statement. They were making a civilizational one. A people with that history and that self-awareness do not accept permanent subordination gracefully. American policymakers who treated Iran as a chess piece consistently underestimated what they were dealing with. The revolution of 1979 was not what Iran wanted. It was what Iran got after everything Iran actually wanted had been systematically denied. What Iran wanted in 1906 was democracy. What it wanted in 1951 was sovereignty over its resources. What it wanted in the 1960s was reform without repression. Each of these aspirations was either directly suppressed by external interference or distorted by the Shah's authoritarian government, which was itself sustained by external support. When the revolution came, it swept away not just the Shah but the entire secular democratic tradition that the coup of 1953 had derailed. The Islamic. To understand Iranian foreign policy since 1979, you have to understand the security environment Iran actually faces. Not the one Western media portrays, but the documented strategic reality. Iran shares borders with 15 countries. It is surrounded by American military bases in Iraq, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, in the UAE, in Afghanistan until 2021, and in Turkey through NATO. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is headquartered 20 minutes by air from Iran's coast. Israel, which has conducted multiple military strikes against Iranian facilities and personnel on Iranian soil, possesses an undeclared nuclear arsenal. Iran is a country that has been under continuous external military and economic pressure for 4 decades. Its security concerns are not paranoid, they are structural. The Iran-Iraq War, which lasted 8 years and killed between 500,000 and 1 million Iranians, shaped Iranian strategic culture more deeply than any subsequent event. Iraqi forces used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and civilians, with documented American awareness and diplomatic protection. When Iran brought evidence of chemical weapons used to the UN Security Council, the United States blocked the condemnation resolutions. Iran fought the most devastating war of its modern history, while the world's most powerful nations provided material and diplomatic cover to the side that was using banned weapons of mass destruction against it. Iran's subsequent determination to develop its own deterrent capacity is not aggression. It is the rational conclusion of that experience. Iran's nuclear program needs to be understood in this context, not in the context of Western proliferation anxiety alone. When Iranian leaders say they will not be lectured on weapons by countries that use nuclear weapons on civilian populations, supplied chemical weapons intelligence to their enemies, and maintain undeclared nuclear arsenals in the region, they are making a specific historical argument. It is an argument that requires engagement, not dismissal. The nuclear question cannot be resolved by ignoring the history that produced it. Every serious diplomatic effort to address Iran's nuclear program, including the JCPOA, has succeeded precisely when it acknowledged Iranian security concerns as legitimate. Every failure has occurred when it hasn't. The sanctions regime imposed on Iran deserves honest examination. Economic sanctions have been in place against Iran in various forms since 1979, 46 years. They have prevented Iran from accessing international banking, trading its oil freely, importing medical equipment and technology, and participating in the global economy on normal terms. Their effect on the Iranian government has been limited. Authoritarian governments are generally resilient to economic pressure that falls primarily on civilian populations. Their effect on ordinary Iranians has been severe. A 2020 study in The Lancet documented that American sanctions had disrupted Iran's ability to import medicines for chronic disease patients. Sanctions that are justified as targeting a government primarily affect the people living under it. None of this is an argument that every Iranian government decision has been correct, that human rights abuses inside Iran are acceptable, or that Iranian foreign policy has no legitimate targets of criticism. It does not. The repression of Iranian citizens, women, minorities, journalists, political opponents, by the Islamic Republic is documented and real. But holding Iran's government to account for its conduct is a different thing from refusing to acknowledge the legitimate grievances that shaped it. Both things can be true simultaneously, and the Western failure to hold both things true at once is precisely the failure of understanding that has made the US-Iran impasse so persistent. Western coverage of Iran is almost exclusively about its nuclear program, its proxy forces, its government statements, and its confrontations with American and Israeli interests. What is almost never covered is the civilizational depth of what Iran is. Persian poetry, Rumi, Hafez, Ferdowsi, has shaped human spiritual and literary expression across the Islamic world and beyond. Rumi, the 13th century Persian poet, is the best-selling poet in the United States, a fact that should give pause to anyone who believes Iran and America have nothing to offer each other. Iranian cinema is recognized globally as among the most significant national film traditions of the last 50 years. Iranian mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy defined the medieval intellectual world. This is the country that American policy treats as a problem to be managed. Iranian cinema deserves particular recognition as a form of national integrity under extraordinary pressure. Directors like Abbas Kiarostami, Asghar Farhadi, and Jafar Panahi have produced internationally acclaimed work that tells human stories from inside Iranian society, with a honesty and complexity that the Islamic Republic's censorship apparatus consistently tries to suppress and consistently fails to extinguish. Farhadi has won 2 Academy Awards for Best Foreign Language Film. Panahi has been imprisoned and banned from filmmaking and continues to make films anyway, smuggling them out of the country on memory cards. The persistence of Iranian artistic expression in the face of state repression is not just culturally significant. It is evidence of a civilization that cannot be reduced to its government. The Iranian women's movement, which has grown from the woman, life, freedom protests of 2022 onward into the most significant internal challenge to the Islamic Republic in its history, deserves to be understood on its own terms, not as a Western foreign policy instrument. Iranian women are not protesting because the West encourages them to. They are protesting because they are Iranians who want to determine the terms of their own lives. This is the same impulse that drove the constitutional revolution of 1906, the oil nationalization of 1951, and the revolution of 1979, the consistent Iranian demand for self-determination. The demand has not changed, only the target has changed. The Iranian diaspora, 30 to 40 million people of Iranian descent living outside Iran, represents one of the most educated, successful, and culturally vibrant immigrant communities on Earth. In the United States alone, Iranian Americans have the highest educational attainment of any immigrant group, higher median household income than the American average, and a disproportionate presence in medicine, engineering, academic research, and the technology sector. This is not a community defined by the confrontations between their birth country and their adopted one. It is a community defined by the specific Iranian values that produced it: education, discipline, intellectual ambition, and a civilizational confidence that survives everything the last century has thrown at it. What the United States and Iran have in common is more substantial than what divides them, and what divides them is almost entirely the product of specific policy decisions made by specific governments, not of some fundamental civilizational incompatibility. The Iranian people and the American people have no natural quarrel. They have a political one, created in 1953, deepened in 1979, institutionalized over 4 decades, and maintained by governments on both sides that have found the confrontation more useful than its resolution. That is a policy choice. Policy choices can be changed. American policy toward Iran has been characterized by a specific and recurring failure: the inability to distinguish between the Iranian government and the Iranian people, and the consequent targeting of the latter in an attempt to change the former. This failure has appeared in every administration since 1979, and it has produced the same result every time. The Iranian government is strengthened by the confrontation. The Iranian people are weakened by the economic consequences, and the possibility of genuine diplomatic normalization recedes further. The lesson is not complicated. It is sanctions that hurt the population without changing the government's fundamental security calculus do not work as intended. They work as a grievance generator. There have been genuine missed opportunities for rapprochement. After the September 11 attacks, Iran, which had no sympathy for al-Qaeda's ideology, cooperated with the United States in the effort against the Taliban in Afghanistan, providing intelligence and facilitating the Bonn Agreement that established the post-Taliban Afghan government. Iranian officials in Geneva handed American diplomats detailed intelligence on al-Qaeda networks. In 2003, Iran's reformist government under President Khatami sent a comprehensive proposal to Washington through the Swiss embassy, offering to address every American concern: nuclear program, support for Hezbollah, recognition of Israel's right to exist. The Bush administration did not respond. It refused to engage. Within 2 years, Ahmadinejad had replaced Khatami, and the reformist window had closed. The JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear deal, was the most significant attempt to break the cycle. It worked, within its defined parameters. Iran reduced its enriched uranium stockpile by 98%. It eliminated its heavy water reactor. It accepted unprecedented inspection access. The IAEA verified Iran's compliance in 15 consecutive reports. When the Trump administration withdrew from the agreement in 2018, it did so not because Iran had violated it. It had not. But because the agreement, as designed, was working. What the Trump administration found unacceptable was not Iranian non-compliance. It was Iranian compliance that didn't address enough other issues. Iran, which had fulfilled its obligations under the deal, found itself re-sanctioned anyway. The lesson that Iran drew, and the lesson any rational actor would draw, was that compliance with agreements is not sufficient protection against American unilateralism. The cost of American strategic ignorance about Iran has been paid primarily by the Iranian people, through sanctions, through the economic isolation that has prevented Iran from developing its considerable natural and human resources, and through the domestic political consequence of permanent external hostility. Every time Washington applies maximum pressure, it gives the Islamic Republic's hardliners exactly the argument they need. See, engagement with America is impossible. The reformists who have repeatedly tried to build bridges, Khatami, the negotiators who produced the JCPOA, the students who carried the woman, life, freedom banners, have been undermined as much by American policy failures as by the Islamic Republic's own repression. The question for Washington is not whether it can change Iran's government. It cannot. The question is whether it can change its own approach enough to give Iranian civil society the space it needs to do so itself. The United States has made significant strategic errors in its relationship with Iran, not because it is evil, but because it has consistently substituted short-term strategic convenience for honest long-term engagement. The 1953 coup solved a short-term problem and created a 70-year one. The arms sales to the Shah solved short-term alliance management and created the Islamic Republic's military inheritance. The failure to respond to Khatami's 2003 offer solved a short-term domestic political problem and closed the reformist window. The withdrawal from the JCPOA solved a short-term political promise and produced the most advanced Iranian nuclear program in history. The pattern is not incompetence. It is a consistent preference for the immediate over the sustainable, and Iran has paid the price. Iran is a country of 89 million people, the majority of them under 40, with the highest literacy rate in the region, an educated professional class that rivals any in the developing world, a civilizational tradition that has survived the Mongols, multiple empires, colonialism, revolution, and 46 years of international isolation. It sits on the fourth largest proven oil reserves and second largest natural gas reserves on Earth. It has a domestic industrial base, a significant agricultural sector, and one of the most dynamic civil societies in the Middle East, despite everything its government does to suppress it. The Iran that Western policy addresses is the Islamic Republic. The Iran that Western policy ignores is everything else, and everything else is the majority. What would a genuinely resolved US-Iran relationship produce? Practically, the reopening of the Iranian economy to international trade and investment, which would accelerate Iranian economic development and give the Iranian middle class the stability that makes moderate politics possible. The normalization of diplomatic relations, which would give both governments direct communication channels rather than the crisis-prone indirect ones currently in use. The integration of Iran's significant natural gas reserves into the European energy market, which would reduce European dependence on Russian energy, a strategic American interest. and the inclusion of Iran in a regional security architecture that currently excludes it, which is the single most important structural precondition for genuine stability in the Middle East. These are not Iranian demands. They are the logical conclusions of any serious strategic analysis. This episode has tried to do something that most coverage of Iran does not present: the Iranian perspective as a perspective, not as a threat assessment, not as a proliferation concern, not as a foreign policy problem, but as the viewpoint of a real civilization with a real history, real grievances, and real aspirations. The Iranian people are not America's enemies. They are in many ways natural partners, culturally sophisticated, educationally ambitious, geographically positioned to bridge East and West, with natural resource wealth that could support a stable and prosperous regional order. The governments that have governed Iran since 1979 are not the Iranian people, and the Iranian people's ability to determine their own government, which was denied them in 1953, and which the Islamic Republic continues to deny them, is the most important unresolved question in Iranian political life. It will be resolved by Iranians, not by sanctions, not by airstrikes, by Iranians. History in Progress exists because we believe that understanding history honestly, all of it from every angle, with every perspective, is the foundation for understanding the present. This episode has presented the Iranian perspective, not as a validation of every Iranian government decision, but as a corrective to a decades-long pattern of Western discourse that treats Iranian experience as irrelevant context. It is not irrelevant context, it is the story. The 1953 coup, the Shah's repression, the revolution's complexity, the Iran-Iraq war's chemical weapons, the diplomatic offers ignored, the JCPOA abandoned. These are not Iranian grievances. They are documented historical facts, and a foreign policy that does not reckon with documented historical facts is not a foreign policy. It is a prolonged strategic error. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. In Episode 7, we bring everything this series has built to the Iraq wars, and the question that may be the most consequential in modern American foreign policy: was the 2003 invasion really about oil? The evidence is more complex and more damning than either side of that debate usually acknowledges.